Thumbs up if you can hear me through your headsets. That's what I like to see. Hello, everybody. It is so good to see you all here today. My name is Charlotte Evans. I'm the Director of Global Customer Advocacy at Coursera for Business, and I'm thrilled to be here in Dubai. I have to tell you, my first time coming to Dubai was in 2013, and I saw that you all had figured out how to coordinate a Whitney Houston song with the Dubai fountain. And I was like, this is a magical place. And over the weekend, I saw the future innovations that you all are leading forward when I went to the Museum of the Future, and I was blown away again. Floating buildings in the future that levitate, robot dogs, drone taxis. The innovation is just continuing to blow my mind. And all of this really requires constant innovation, constant reskilling and upskilling. And that's really what we're here today to talk about, is how can we make sure that the UAE remains on the cutting edge of all of these innovations and can drive forward consistent change. My role within Coursera is to work with companies all around the world. I've supported and advised over 100 of the Fortune 500 companies who are really starting to think about how they can go about becoming a skills-based organization. So let's kind of set the stage and talk about what are some of the trends that we're noticing within our data, and then if you're thinking about this approach of becoming a skills-based organization as well, what are some of the tactical steps that you can think about? But before we dive into some of those tactical elements, let's anchor around some of the research. So Coursera does quite a few different slices and dices of our data because we have over 190 million people learning with us on the platform. So we can really start to see what are the evolution of skills that are happening, where are people leaning in, where are they retracting, and then how are there different regional differences. So every year for the last 7 years, we've done a global skills report looking at just that question. To no surprise to anyone, Gen AI is skyrocketing. The first year that Gen AI was a thing, it was like 1 course a minute for an enrollment. And now, I think when I made these slides, it was 12. Now it's gone up to 14 a minute, which is hard to wrap my mind around, right, when I really start to think about these numbers. Interestingly, learners are also choosing to pursue deeper mastery in skilling through our professional certificates, which is a series of courses. And we're also noticing an evolution of skilling in 2 interesting areas. If I think about kind of the conversation right now in the workforce, it's this idea of, will we all be automated out of our jobs, or will it be role augmentation? And I think there is a reality, right, of both happening right now. But as this rapid evolution of AI is coming into play, we're seeing a real need to focus on critical thinking skills. How can you push back on the machine and what it's producing? So we're seeing a skyrocketing growth in critical thinking as a skill. But we're also seeing that these systems, the tech infrastructure, is also causing a lot of concern. And so we're seeing a big growth in things like cybersecurity skilling. And across the board, Gen AI skills are just surging. So we've seen 195% year-over-year increase in Gen AI enrollments globally. And specifically within MENA, we're noticing 128% growth year over year. I would love to see a little competition start to happen between LATAM and MENA. I think there's some opportunities to continue really fostering this development and growth in the Gen AI space even more. And where are we seeing some of this maturity? It is concentrated to the most part in the West. So we're looking at this from a perspective of skills depth in AI skills. So the countries that are highlighted in blue on this map, now move over here so you all can see it. The countries in the blue are the ones that have the top 20 listings for AI maturity, where the others are still kind of room for growth. And so as we start to think about about these opportunities, and I think there's a unique option here within the UAE, given a lot of the very strong, innovative policies that the government is putting forward to really drive forward a strategic at-scale strategy of how can we really uplift the UAE to become blue on this map. But let's look a little bit at what is happening within MENA specifically, and then I also have some data on the UAE as well to kind of guide this conversation. So some places that are really, really successful, we're noticing that learners are leaning into a mobile style learning in general, right? I see you all on your phones as well, right? There's so much ease that comes from being able to just open up the app, take a quick lesson, and continue to learn in that way. And we're also seeing a growing population of women learners on the platform. I know there's a lot of infrastructure in play to make sure that there's more of an equitable promotion opportunity for women within the UAE. And so to see that there are opportunities to cultivate that skilling as well is really exciting. I love the example from ADNOC, just down the road in Abu Dhabi. They are really partnering with us on a lot of different skilling areas, particularly within their technical teams. And oops, we lost the slide. I don't know if our tech folks in the back can help at all, or if somebody from Coursera can help get the slides back on the screen. But what ADNOC has been doing is really focusing on AI training with us. And so this is something we're hearing from many different organizations in the Middle East who are wanting to kind of get on the map in these areas, whether it's at a literacy level, or starting to think with their developers or their technicians, right? There's different kind of user populations that can be activated in this process. And specifically, with women learners, what we're noticing is that there's an increase in enrollments in Gen AI courses. They're also investing in professional certificates, and they're focusing on STEM courses. So some of the courses that we see that are really popular are some of these generative AI courses. How many of you has anyone taken a deep learning AI course from Andrew Ng, our co-founder? Love to see some hands raised. If you haven't taken one yet from Andrew Ng, I'd highly recommend it. I met him for the first time a couple months ago, and I kind of fangirled in front of him because he's taught me so much in my own upskilling and reskilling journey. I feel like his courses are really accessible and digestible, and they focus a lot on hands-on learning, right? There's labs to get you to practice, playgrounds for Gen AI, Jupyter notebooks, so there's lots of ways to really start to cultivate that skilling experience. All right, and the slide you've probably all been most excited to see is what's happening here in the UAE. So what I think is really interesting about this slide is actually these areas. So what are learners focusing on with skills, and what are employers focusing on? So what we can do through this research, we've tagged all of our courses and all of the assessments within those courses to just over 2,000 skills. And what this allows us to do is be able to get objective skills measurement. I worked with a credit services company back in the US, and they came to me and said, we're really struggling with these subjective skills where the learners were saying they're amazing at Python and their managers were saying they're here at Python. How do we build a strategy off of this delta, right? Where do our people actually fall? And so because we have 190 million people on the platform, we're able to start to see through our algorithms and our grading systems, what are these objective skills measurements? And within the UAE, what we're noticing is that for learners, they're focusing on things like emerging technology, leadership development, but with top employer skills, it's really aligned to these trends that we're noticing in AI and ML, as well as customer service, right? If I think about the kind of the tech and banking and customer-centric industries that are here in the region, really starting to think about that human-to-human connection while the technology can accelerate the work is something that's been a critical skill. Now to geek out a little bit in terms of what we're noticing on more of this technical side, we did a really interesting report from with AWS, with Amazon Web Services recently, and they were starting to look at kind of this connection of cloud and AI. And one thing, I was at a conference in April, May? I can't remember exactly which month. It was a bit of a blur, but I was in Germany with over 100 chief data officers, and they were really wrangling with this idea of a lot of their peers in the leadership were wanting to Gen AI it, right? Hit the Gen AI button. There's a secret button somewhere you press, and boom, productivity suddenly happens, right? And all these data scientists were going, there's no secret button, right? And it's a lot of really tough work that needs to start happening to activate this, right? It's getting your infrastructure to be solid, your data to be clean, your databases to be well managed. And that's often kind of work that people don't want to think about prioritizing, but to really invest in this AI boom, that infrastructure, that hygiene really needs to be there. So I was really excited when we did this report with AWS because I think it gets to the core of what a lot of the technologists are talking about right now of what needs to happen to really steward this transformation into play. So the report was looking at a couple of different areas that we surveyed with AWS over 750 senior technology leaders and started to notice kind of what are they thinking about in this world. They saw, interestingly, and this is the key thing I think to take away, 95% of leaders wanted to prioritize cloud transformation as a key business goal. And if we think about why, right, what AI is going to be doing is hitting your cloud ecosystem so much more than any time before. And so suddenly your costs can just skyrocket in a very unpredictable way as you start to infuse this into a lot of your technology and your services. So for those technologists, as they think about cost management, effective cloud structures are really, really important. They're also feeling this much broader urgency around skill development because this pace of change is just so quick. The shelf life of these skills is dropping tremendously. Every day we wake up, I feel like, to another ChatGPT announcement from Sam Altman, right? It's tomorrow, I think it's going to be GPT-6 probably, right? Based on the rate that they're evolving. And so what did this report start to notice in terms of trends? So a couple areas here, right, as we think about critical skills. 95% of technology leaders are noticing this skill. Cloud is the top one, as well as data, cybersecurity, and AI. But if we think about really what's happening here, it's things like identity management to reduce cybersecurity possible breaches. That often is the number one reason why companies are coming to us and saying we need training for our technologists. We just had a data breach. We are worried about the costs of our data being insecure in our cloud environments. We just migrated to a new hyperscaler. How do you help us? And the VP of Technology Strategy at Walmart really talks about this as they think about how AI can be part of this automation process. And this is that kind of push and pull, right, between automation and augmentation. As we think about the infrastructure that's in play, who will benefit from these skills? Developers are really going to be the ones who are starting to figure out how can we use our cloud ecosystem, the API is attached to it, and so on, to really create these automated workflows. This is a lot of where agentic AI starts to come into play, if you've been hearing that chatter. And interestingly, I think there's also a conversation about mirroring the workplace. So I mentioned earlier about Andrew Ng, our co-founder at Coursera. He also is authoring prolifically about courses on his platform, Deep Learning AI. A lot of those courses are on the Coursera platform. And I think one thing that Andrew has really emphasized is the value of hands-on learning. And so for learners, what we're seeing is when they have the chance to practice, they are increasing their proficiency, their skill scores are going up, they're able to apply it to their work much faster, and we're noticing that they're moving through content at a much more efficient rate. And so as we started to talk to all of these technologists, this message really came through as well as a running through thread, right? 60% are saying that real-world projects are really important. So as I think about this at Coursera, right, we have these public courses that are available, but you also have the option, if you're an enterprise customer of ours, to make your own custom playgrounds, whether you wanted to make a Gen AI playground with a Gemini or a GPT model, or you're thinking about building out your own Jupyter Notebook sandbox for your learners to practice with AI auto-grading. These are all options that are available. And what's happening specifically within the UAE in terms of broader trends that we notice within tech leaders and their priorities? So the top two that stand out, keeping pace with technology, 61%, and 60% are staying ahead of security threats, right? If I think about kind of the why behind all of these, when I go and talk to business leaders, the two things I encourage them to think about with ROI, which things will drive revenue up in your P&L and which things will reduce cost, and how can we kind of reverse engineer the skilling around that. So as I think about these kind of two top priorities, if I was a CTO and I was thinking about this, I'd be thinking about the money, right? If I can stay ahead of the technology, I can make my company more money. If I have the right people in front of me that have the skills to do this work, we can deliver additional revenue. But I also think about the cost, right? If I have a security threat, that is an unexpected hit that my organization will take when we have to clean up the damage that comes from any sort of attack, right? Any sort of cyber attack. And so, right, this is really an opportunity to think about how we grow. Now, Stanford has done some amazing research as well on this. So pivoting from AWS to over what Stanford is talking about, they've built out an AI report that I think is really fascinating. It also did a kind of similar country slice. This is not a report that Coursera has had involvement in, but I wanted to bring forward what they are showcasing because I think it sets the stage nicely about what some of the trends are that we're seeing within the UAE. So as we think about kind of workforce transformation, right, and knowledge economies, how do we start to really navigate all of this change? What's happening with hiring, with talent management, and so on? The first thing that Stanford noticed in this report is that the year-over-year hiring change is shifting, right? It's 24% growth year over year for AI transformation. Now, if you look at this, right, India is at the top, and they are, the pixels are too close to the screen, 33%, whereas the UAE is 24%. So there might be some considerations here, right, in terms of if you want to stay on the cutting edge, do you have the right talent in your workforce, in your governments, at your campuses to drive forward this change? How can you incentivize people to come to the UAE to really deliver that change? Now, a place where the UAE is doing really well is in that front of talent migration. So a 4.13x net positive increase in AI talent migration. So if we think about this, right, top three, so along with Luxembourg, of all places, still haven't been there, need to add it to my list, Cyprus and the UAE, top three as we look at LinkedIn users. So if we're thinking about this, right, we've set the full stage about all of this change that's happening within our workforces, our organizations, our institutions. How do we really start to leverage this forward? Now, there's this through thread of this idea of becoming a skills-based organization. And it's a conversation that, as I've been on stages this year, it is growing immensely. The idea of becoming a skills-based organization is not something new, right? A lot of people have been talking about this for a while. But it seems like this year, more than any other year, organizations are really trying to crack the code. And I don't think anyone has fully figured it out yet, but we're all kind of in the mud together working through it. So if you're not as familiar with Coursera, just before we dive into that, just so you know who we are, a lot of you might know us for this, right? We have content from university and industry partners, the likes of Google, Microsoft, Yale, University of London, so many more. I've tried to take all of the courses, all 12 12,000. I'm at 75 right now, so I got a little bit of work left. A new Anthropic courses just dropped this morning, so I have those on my to-do list now. But we think a lot about content, right? But where we've really started to evolve is how we also can add in AI into a lot of our platform to make the learning experience much more personalized and customized. And what this allows us to do is to help learners really be able to take this content with high course quality and from the best learners, best faculty out there with globally accessible options. So a lot of our content has been translated into over 20 languages and is available for you to just toggle into different languages as you go. And through thread of this, I love what one of our CEO has been saying, Greg Hart. He started to talk about this idea of, sure, you might know us as a course platform with content, but really at the core, skills has become this atomic unit to really guide how we're thinking about learning. And this conversation around skills is therefore really facilitating a lot of discussion on how can we then help universities, governments, and companies really facilitate becoming a skills-based organization. So what is skills-based organization, or SBO? Deloitte talks about this as kind of like a gig economy, right? So rather than thinking about you're a business analyst or an HR professional or a data specialist, it's rather looking at what are the skills that you have and how does that really anchor a lot of the work that you need to do to drive forward a certain initiative at your organization. It almost creates like a flexible gig economy of sorts. And for organizations that do lean into this, they're seeing an uptick in quality of hires, right? If they make the decisions based off of skills proficiency instead of, say, just a credential, it's allowing for a much more solid, robust workforce. However, and I think this is why the conversation is still happening, is this stat right here. 85% of HR executives know that they need some sort of skills framework, but only 10% have a standard framework. There are skills taxonomies everywhere right now. You have a taxonomy, right? It's like Oprah giving out cars, right? Everyone has a taxonomy. And so it's really hard to figure out this infrastructure when there's so much happening out there. But there's still a value add in all of this, right? Why is it worthwhile to wrestle and wrangle with this if it's kind of a bit of a mess right now? Well, a lot of the research from the likes of Deloitte are showing the value add if you do invest in this, right? Higher retention, better quality staff, more likely to see growth and development. But here's the kicker, right? McKinsey is noticing for companies that don't invest in an SBO approach, they're seeing a cost to the tune of $116 million in organizational productivity loss for a standard S&P 500 company. Yikes. That's a lot of money, right? And so a lot of companies that I'm working with want to start somewhere. And I'll get, I don't know if you all have seen these, but these spreadsheets, these massive spreadsheets, every row, every role, every skill, and you start to really think about every possible permutation of what might need to happen for training, and you think, whew, when are we going to be able to deliver on all of this? People have their day jobs, they need to get their work done, hit their deadlines, drop their kid off at school, take care of their elderly relative. They can't be spending all of their time reskilling themselves, right? What are the top things we really want to focus on? And there's a quote from Brené Brown that I really love. How many of you know Brené Brown? She's one of my favorites. But she talked in her podcast about clear is kind. And it was in a different context, but I think the idea around it, right, of clarity that organizations and institutions can provide is really powerful. If you say, here's where we're focused, Here's where we're going as an institution. Come with us on this journey. We want you to be successful. Here are the skills for you to be successful. It's a beautiful springboard, right? It's a crisp, clear story, and that will provide that kind of intrinsic motivation for people. And this is what Brian Hancock at McKinsey is talking about. Rather than kind of giving this smorgasbord of every skill under the sun, focus on a couple of pathways, right? I worked with Dow Chemical, and they're a chemical manufacturing company in Michigan. And they came to us last year and said, we need to upskill 80% of our IT workforce in Gen AI this quarter. 80? 80? Not 18? Yes, 80, okay. And so what they did was they built out a learning path of 3 courses, about 6 to 8 hours. Their CIO finished the badge, put it on LinkedIn that he'd finished it, so now no one had any excuse. And then all of a sudden they saw this really big momentum, right? It was targeted and focused skilling. Gen AI was the thing that mattered. And they got to 84% of their workforce having a Gen AI proficiency by the end of the quarter. So we smashed that target. And a lot of this emphasis, right, is kind of the consistent through thread that we're noticing from frameworks like the ones from PwC, where you might start with a pilot in step 1, think about an impact area in step 2, and then much more of a broader cultural and technological shift will start to happen as you progress. Now, if you drive down the highway and you see all these brands from all these different organizations globally, and you think, oh, they got it all figured out. I'm talking to like the 100 people from the Fortune 500. Most of them are still here. They're still figuring it out. So you're not alone in this process. There's a lot that's still being discovered. And I think there's ways to create these incremental steps, right? Not to wait until the technology and the culture is all in place to say, okay, now we start, right? Iterate, do small pilots, learn from the data, grow, and then eventually you'll have this much broader cultural transformation. And how are we helping to facilitate this on Coursera? Well, 4 key ways. I mentioned earlier we went through this whole retagging effort with Lightcast, and so now there is a full 2,400 set of skills that are available. Lightcast has a really rich data set of global labor market data to guide a lot of their tagging. We've also gone through a big process of figuring out how we can create diagnostics. So much like this idea of what we were talking about earlier of objective skills measurement, what we have are these level sets, and we're moving toward a future system of verified skills assessment to allow for that kind of objectivity of skill scoring. The third is the pathways, the learner paths with our badges. This was the Dow use case that I was mentioning earlier. These are open badges that have interoperability and are shareable, and we've seen a 24% uptick in engagement from learners that use these badges. And then finally, as admins, you have access to all of the analytics that go with it as well. And so one company that's really leaned into this is Aker Solutions. They are based out of Norway. They're an energy company, and they've really focused on, if we think about Brian Hancock's quote, they were really focusing on both technical and non-technical roles. So they were looking at how can we think about 6 strategic competency areas. So they could have chosen several hundred. They chose 6 instead to really zoom in on, and had these curated pathways to make sure that they weren't kind of trying to throw the kitchen sink at their learners, but instead had a really refined, tight curation. I'm going to keep going. And so as we think about this within Coursera, and I'll wrap up with our skills track solution, what we've heard from a lot of folks is we want to get started in this SBO landscape, but we don't know how to start. Please help us. There's so much content out there in Coursera, but in any other learning ecosystem as well. It's overwhelming for us. It's overwhelming for the learners. How can we make this a more simplified process? And a lot of this is due to this rapid technological change, right? We saw the progression toward ChatGPT just going so much faster than any other technology innovation we've known to date. And these skills are going to change over the next 5 years. You might build a solution today and tomorrow it's irrelevant, right? And so how do you keep all of this up to date? And the workforce is going to need retraining as well. If we look at 100 people, there's probably 100 of us in this room, right? 59 of us are going to need to be fully retrained in the next 5 years, but 11 of us might not get trained. So how can we think about really fostering and facilitating a much more robust training environment for everybody? And the cost of this talent transformation is significant, right? If we think about training internal talent versus training and bringing in external folks, there's a definite cost equation where it's going to be much more costly to train people from the outside than really leveraging your people from within. And so what we've built out is 4 solutions in 4 critical areas that we're seeing around data, software, IT, and Gen AI. These are carefully curated solutions with verified skills and all data backed. And a lot of this is coming from critical resources, the likes of Lightcast, ESCO, ONET, and LinkedIn, to use a full ecosystem and kind of career graph to anchor this work. And I'm aware of time, so I think I'm going to wrap here. But it was such a pleasure to be with you all today. If you have any questions, we'd love to keep the conversation going. Our booth is right at the entrance over there, and there's lots of Coursera folks. If Coursera people, you want to raise your hands. All those hands, those are Coursera people that want to talk to you. They want to hear your use cases, your stories. I'll be around. I want to chat with you. I hope you have an amazing rest of the conference. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and hope to keep the conversation going. Thank you.